I told my husband if he ever smashed cake in my face I'd leave. On our wedding day he did it anyway. Sometimes it takes just one moment to see everything clearly. For me, that moment came with a handful of wedding cake smeared across my face on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. In that instant, 3 years of overlooked red flags suddenly came into sharp focus, and I realized I had to choose between my dignity and everyone else's idea of what I should tolerate. I'm 27 years old, and until recently I believed I'd found my forever person. My now ex-husband, who's 29, had been my partner for 3 years. In all that time I'd never known him to be particularly selfish, occasionally immature, yes, but even that was rare. Or at least that's what I told myself. Looking back, I realize I'd been conditioned to accept the bare minimum as exceptional treatment, thanks to a lifetime of family abuse that taught me to be grateful for scraps of basic decency. This story begins with those viral cake-smashing videos that became popular on social media. You know, the ones where someone ruins another person's special moment by shoving their face into a cake for cheap laughs and internet clout. My husband found these videos absolutely hilarious and was constantly showing them to me, despite knowing I found them cruel and unfunny. What he also knew was that I had personal trauma connected to cake smashing. When I was 17, I begged my mother not to do the family tradition of smashing my face into my birthday cake. I'd spent time and money getting my hair and makeup done for my birthday photos, and I explicitly asked her to skip the tradition just this once. She promised she would respect my wishes, and I trusted her. The moment I blew out my candles, she grabbed the back of my head and shoved my face into the cake. One of the decorations, a hard piece of candy or plastic, sliced my forehead open. While the cut wasn't deep enough to require hospital treatment, it bled substantially and left me with both physical pain and deep emotional wounds. My birthday was ruined. I locked myself in my room for the rest of the day, and my mother's response was to call me a brat for being upset, something she still does to this day. I shared this story with my husband, explaining exactly why these videos triggered me and why the act felt so violating. I told him plainly, if you ever did something like that to me, I'd leave you. He started laughing, treating it like a joke, but I was completely serious. Despite my clear boundary and the explanation behind it, he really wasn't taking me seriously. Fast forward to our wedding day a few days ago. Everything had been perfect up until that moment. I felt like a princess in my elaborate white dress, with my hair professionally styled and makeup flawlessly applied. The venue was beautiful, our families were there, and I was genuinely excited about starting our new life as newlyweds. The day represented hope, love, and a future I dreamed of. We reached the cake-cutting ceremony, and as I turned toward him with a smile, he scooped up a huge chunk of our wedding cake and smashed it all over my face. Time seemed to slow down as frosting and cake filled my eyes, nose, and mouth. The expensive makeup I'd had professionally done was destroyed. My carefully styled hair was matted with frosting. The top of my dress, part of an ensemble that cost thousands of dollars, was stained and ruined. He stood there laughing at me, then said, "You should see your face," and continued laughing as if this was the funniest thing he'd ever done. The crowd, mostly my family members, joined in the laughter. In that moment, I wasn't a bride having a magical moment with her new husband. I was the butt of a joke, humiliated in front of everyone I cared about on what should have been the most special day of my life. Without saying a word, I started walking away. He realized I was actually leaving and tried to catch up, dismissing my reaction by saying I was being extra. I pushed him away and ordered an Uber. The wedding venue was in the city, so the car arrived within 3 minutes. As I headed outside, most of the wedding guests followed, telling me to come back, to not overreact, to think about what I was doing. I got into that Uber and never looked back. I went straight to our apartment, packed most of my belongings, and checked into a hotel. Later, I moved in with a friend who offered me a place to stay. For days afterward, both families blew up my phone with messages calling me childish and dramatic. They insisted my husband was a good man and that it was just a joke, the same minimization I'd heard my entire life whenever someone hurt me and I dared to have feelings about it. My husband called repeatedly, begging me to come home, saying he wanted to talk. His apologies all followed the same pattern. He was sorry I got so emotional, sorry I took it that way, sorry I couldn't take a joke. Notice what was missing. Any acknowledgement of wrongdoing, any real accountability, any genuine remorse for violating a boundary I'd explicitly set. The next morning, I called him to get his reasoning for what he'd done. His explanation was even worse than I'd anticipated. He told me he thought it was a funny prank, and that doing it on our wedding day, supposedly a happy occasion, might change my mind about cake smashing. He also admitted he knew it was a tradition in my family that I'd chosen not to follow, and he thought he could get points with my relatives by forcing me to participate. Think about that for a moment. He knew I had trauma around this specific act. He knew I'd explicitly forbidden it. He knew my relationship with my family was complicated and often painful. And his solution was to publicly humiliate me in front of them to win their approval, the same family members who had spent years emotionally abusing me. When I pointed out that his apologies weren't actually apologies, that saying, "I'm sorry you took it that way" isn't the same as "I'm sorry I hurt you," he doubled down. I reminded him that he'd forced me to invite my mother, despite knowing about our terrible relationship and the years of verbal abuse and public humiliation she'd subjected me to. I explained that I was already the black sheep of my family, and that his actions had essentially joined them in tormenting me. That's when he said the words that ended our marriage. "Why should I have to apologize because you can't take a joke?" I exploded. I told him that if I had hurt him to that degree, the first thing I would do is apologize, not because I had to, but because I loved him and would be horrified to cause him pain. I explained that marriage means standing by your partner, but he'd chosen to ally himself with people who had a history of abusing me. The issue wasn't about the ruined dress or the destroyed cake or even the money wasted. It was about his complete disregard for my explicitly stated boundaries and his willingness to traumatize me for social approval. He tried to shift blame, saying it wasn't his fault he wouldn't apologize because my family had told him I was being dramatic and that I was hurting them by leaving the wedding over a joke. He claimed he loved me and didn't want to break up over this nonsense, demanding I just come home and get over it. I told him I wasn't coming home and that it wasn't about the cake anymore. I couldn't be with someone who refused to apologize when he was wrong and who would gaslight me into accepting blame for his actions. That's when he started screaming and cursing at me. After listening to his verbal assault for about a minute, I hung up. Within half an hour, my phone was exploding with messages from both families. My mother's were particularly cruel. She told me I'd end up alone because I can't take jokes and would never be able to keep a man with my attitude. She added that my biological clock was running out fast, and when it did, no one would want me and I'd die alone. His sister's messages were equally vicious, calling me a disgusting B-word for hurting her brother and wasting his time. But then she revealed something that changed everything. She said she wished he would have broken up with me 2 years ago when he first wanted to. So now I knew he'd wanted to leave me for years. But there was more. In her rage, his sister also revealed that he'd been cheating on me for 6 months with his ex-girlfriend who had wanted him back. According to her, the ex had eventually dropped him because he chose to stay with me instead of leaving for her. The betrayal cut deep. I'd had a good relationship with his sister, and she'd known about the cheating the entire time without telling me. I guess she figured since I was leaving anyway, she might as well put all his secrets on the table. I blocked my entire family and his entire family. I blocked him too and began the process of getting an annulment. My friend graciously offered to let me stay with her for a few months while I got back on my feet, which I gratefully accepted. As I sat there crying while typing out what had happened, the full scope of what I'd lost hit me. 3 years with someone who had never really cared about me. The last remnants of my relationship with my family. The future I'd planned and dreamed about. I was left with just the few true friends who had stood by me, but I was grateful for them. Before blocking him, I warned that if he broke any of my belongings while I was gone, I would take him to court. The responses to my story opened my eyes even more. People pointed out red flags I'd been blind to for years. My friend confirmed that she'd seen concerning patterns but hadn't known how to bring them up. She suggested I stay away from dating until I could work on recognizing these warning signs, because my history of abuse had clearly normalized treatment that should have been unacceptable. Looking back, there were so many signs I'd dismissed as immaturity. He would make me cook second dinners when he didn't like what I'd prepared because his mother had apparently never introduced him to vegetables, so he refused to eat them. He mocked me when I had menstrual cramps. These weren't quirky personality traits, they were signs of someone who expected me to manage his emotions and cater to his whims while showing no consideration for my needs or comfort. When I went to collect my belongings a few days later, I brought a friend for safety and made sure he wasn't there. The exchange was brief and cold, but I got my things and left my keys behind along with the last 3 years of my life. Someone online mentioned that I might have been groomed into accepting this treatment, which explained why he felt comfortable violating such a clear boundary. The observation stung because it rang true. When you're raised in an abusive environment, you learn to be grateful for anyone who treats you slightly better than your worst abusers. You mistake the absence of constant cruelty for love. That wedding cake incident wasn't an isolated moment of poor judgment, it was the culmination of years of boundary testing, disrespect, and emotional manipulation. He knew exactly what he was doing when he humiliated me in front of everyone. He knew my history, knew my triggers, knew my explicit boundaries, and chose to violate them anyway for his own amusement and social gain. The fact that he couldn't even offer a genuine apology afterward showed me everything I needed to know about his character and his respect for me. His immediate shift to verbal abuse when I wouldn't accept his non-apologies revealed who he really was beneath the mask. People asked how the Uber arrived so quickly. The venue was in a busy city area, so ride shares were readily available. Others wondered why my husband gave up trying to stop me so easily. Looking back, I think he was already planning his victim narrative, positioning himself as the wronged party whose wife overreacted to an innocent joke. Some people questioned how I hadn't realized I was being abused, and honestly, I'm still working through that myself. Abuse often happens gradually, with each boundary violation being slightly worse than the last until you lose track of what's normal and acceptable. When you're raised by abusive people, you don't develop a healthy baseline for how you should be treated. The aftermath has been difficult but clarifying. I feel lonely and depressed, but I also feel free. I'm planning to get my finances in order and start therapy before I even consider dating again. I need to understand how I ended up in this situation and learn to recognize red flags before they lead to altars and ruined wedding cakes. My story isn't unique, unfortunately. There are countless people who have their boundaries violated by partners who then demand forgiveness without accountability, who are told by family members that abuse is normal and acceptable, who are gaslit into believing their reactions to mistreatment are the real problem. But here's what I learned: your boundaries matter, even on your wedding day. Especially on your wedding day. If someone who claims to love you will publicly humiliate you on the most important day of your life, what won't they do when the cameras are off and the witnesses are gone? I'm grateful that cake hit my face when it did, because it woke me up before I wasted even more years on someone who saw my pain as entertainment and my trauma as inconvenience. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. I'm still healing, still learning, still rebuilding. But I'm doing it as a person who chose her own dignity over everyone else's comfort, and that's something I'll never regret.